Hey guys, number one Marmaduke fan here. Last time I did kind of a pretty extensive review, and I even kind of like dived into some of like the bonus content in the Dark Horse release of A New Hope, which is a highest recommendation for me. I don't think Marvel Comics has the rights, so you ought to try to pick up the trade paperback if you can. Now I'm going to discuss The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, which are Dark Horse reprints of Marvel Comics. But one of the really nice things Dark Horse Comics did is they tried really hard to get the original talent involved on producing their edition of A New Hope. So their edition of A New Hope was actually made after these two were originally made. And Al Williamson and Carlos Garzon are the pencilers and inkers of both of these books. They weren't able to get Al Williamson to pencil it, but after like working really hard, and then there's this interesting story where George Lucas was going to release the special edition of A New Hope in March, and then they moved it to February, and then they moved it to January. So time was of the essence. So they actually got Al Williamson and Carlos Garzon to join as inkers for their adaptation of A New Hope. And I just really appreciate that because it basically shows like a little love to comics fans, where if you're a comics fan, it's nice to have an artistic consistency across a story, and they worked hard and they made that happen. So both of these were originally produced by Marvel Comics before Dark Horse Comics got the rights to them, and they've been released and re-released multiple times. I think my older brother might have collected these, and I don't know if I still have them anymore. That might be one of those I gave away and regretted later. But this edition, let's see, originally was released as Star Wars issues 39 to 44 by Marvel Comics, and Classic Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back book 1 and 2, and re-released later as Classic Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. The Return of the Jedi was released as like a special miniseries, Return of the Jedi 1 through 4, and then it also got like a Classic Star Wars reprint. But this edition by Dark Horse, they got Tim and Greg Hildebrandt to do some special cover art for it, and they have some nice little bonus illustration stuff at the end to kind of like tie it in with the release of the special editions, the George Lucas special editions in the 90s. But this is a really nice, just nice presentation and bonus material for the comics release. And I kind of like the capitalist decision to try to use the opportunity of the release of the special edition as a chance to reintroduce people to the comics. So this is going to be a short review because it's Star Wars. Like literally every line is memorized by Star Wars nerds, and there's no end of Star Wars discussion on YouTube. Maybe one of the most interesting things about the Marvel Comics adaptation is Archie Goodwin took the opportunity to kind of put his spin on the dialogue. He follows the plot very closely, so kind of like beat for beat, he hits every similar note. But you can kind of tell that a lot of like the famous and iconic quotable lines, Archie is, I don't know, just kind of like he doesn't want to copy the movie line for line. So it's sort of like, what if Archie Goodwin was the dialogue guy for this? Most of the time, I kind of like the movie lines when I notice there's a difference. There's maybe like a little bit more punchy humor to the movie adaptation. But there are other times where you can kind of tell like he's picking up on maybe like a plot hole or a thing that bugs the fans. And I don't know, maybe trying to like flesh it out a little bit more. So maybe one interesting thing is, does Star Wars still work if it's the same beats, but you change the dialogue guy? And it still works. It's still that same classic story that has resonated with so many people. Looking at this, I'm just going to give you like an example. So I recall in the movie, Leia says, "I'd sooner kiss a Wookiee," and Han Solo says, "I can arrange that." And it's just like a little, a clever little one-liner. And this, Archie hits the theme of what it is, this kind of like sexy but testy, tsundere back and forth between Han the scoundrel and Leia the tsundere rebel politician who has so many duties she has to keep up with, but she also feels for Han. She can't, she's almost guilty to admit she has those feelings. Now, I want to read this so you can hear how it's different. "Now it's too late, sweetheart. Your big opportunity is flying out of here. Somehow I'll survive, particularly since it's now obvious that you don't even care about the spare me another lecture about the rebellion. It's all that you ever think about. You're as cold as this planet, and you think you're the one to apply some heat." It's so corny. I love it. So like if you're a real like if you've got like the movie memorized and every line memorized, you're gonna miss little lines like "I'd sooner kiss a Wookiee. I can arrange that." But you know what? Who cares? I'm fine with Archie kind of rephrasing things a little bit. The other departure is the use of a narrator, which I love, because what a narrator does is, in really corny old books, like the famous thing would be Superman punches the guy, and the narrator says, Superman releases his mighty blows upon the criminal, right? So people often like share things like that as a way of saying it. A narrator is corny, but here the narrator is very natural, and the narrator adds something where he's explaining things that might happen between panels. He's communicating things about like how emotionally tense this is for the characters. And that, I think, is a really good use of a narrator, because this isn't a movie. So if you're going to adapt a movie in comic book format, use something that you can use in comic book format that wouldn't work in a movie. Tell the audience something about what's going on. So when used well, what a comic book narrator does is it helps you tighten up some things and help move some things faster by having the narrator tell you some of the things that happened off camera and tell you a bit about the internal monologue without repeating what's going on in the pictures. The pictures tell the story, the narrator adds to the story. So I really appreciate that. They do some little light editing to where when one issue ends and the next issue starts, you can tell they kind of like photoshopped out all of the little like, legal information that was probably originally printed there. Color-wise, I really like what they do color-wise throughout this, because they generally keep it pretty normal. And then on a page like this, they'll sort of like highlight the emotional, drama of the situation by having like the bright orange and yellow contrast with the cool white and blue everywhere else, right? So color isn't just pretty for pretty pictures. Color underscores the emotional situation. Hopping forward, here's another famous line that got changed. Han, I love you. Just remember that, Leia, because I'll be back. The original one is I love you, and Han says, I know. And I think the director, in the director's commentary for Empire Strikes Back, he has this whole cool little story where he didn't like having Han say I love you back, because it's kind of weak to be the one to say I love you second. So I think he says he asked the actors to just be in character and say what came to mind. And then the Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford, they get into character. She says, I love you. Harrison Ford says, I know. And the director says, that's it. I got it. I got the line I wanted. Maybe that's him kind of like making the story a little bit more colorful as he retells the story, but I want to believe that's exactly what happened. And it's a neat little story, because the director is actually allowing the actors to contribute something to the characters. Again, really good use of color for, emotional. Yellow is the color of fear, so it adds some drama to that. I noticed that a lot of the art focuses on chiaroscuro, shadows, the division between light and dark, to add more tension and more emotion to these scenes. That's fantastic. So every cylinder is hitting. The art is hitting. The story beats themselves are hitting. Archie Goodwin is departing from the movie, but keep kind of staying true to the spirit of what the movie is. The colorist is identifying that, little changes, like Darth Vader gets to talk more during the scene. In the movie, it's like a very silent, intense series of scenes. Here they decide, we want to let Darth Vader speak and basically reinforce the theme of Darth Vader trying to persuade Luke to the dark side, right? So when they make a change that makes sense for what they're trying to do in this adaptation. All right, and then some cool little bonus art. Look for these scenes in the special edition of The Empire Strikes Back. All of this is storyboard art by George Hull. And this is kind of interesting because the storyboard artist, it's really interesting because it's almost like a similar skill set to comic art, but whereas a comic artist gets to spread all over the page and do these crazy panel layouts, the storyboard artist has to think specifically about how a camera thinks and looks at things. So Catching the Wampa, Feasting in the Cave by George Hull, a tilt-up shot of the Wampa by George Hull, Vader crossing the Cloud City platform to board his shuttle by George Hull, Vader's shuttle leaving Bespin by George Hull, and an establishing shot of a cloud car fly-through by George Hull. Fantastic. I love seeing like just the little hints of color in that. It was interesting to me to see the giant arrows to kind of like direct the motion of objects in storyboard art. So a really talented artist and just a nice little bonus. This wasn't produced specially for the special edition, but it's nice that when they did a reprint of older comics, they did do something to kind of tie it in to that. Return of the Jedi has the exact same art, creative staff working on it. So a lot of what I said about the earlier editions holds true in this one. Lots of great variety to the action sequences, lots of great, use of emphasis on importance. It's actually a scene on Hoth I want to highlight, actually, because it's a really good illustration of why I think this is a good era of comics. So the AT-ATs or the walkers show up, and they show this great dynamic undershot of it where you see all this detail. And what I like about this is that's not something that, you can't get like a Google image shot of AT-ATs like that. And even if you had a toy, like the toy's probably not going to bend that way. Probably what would happen is they have a nice toy or model of it. They have to like pose it in their imagination that way and move the toy around any which way to like pretend that an AT-AT toy can do that. But it makes the comic book AT-AT feel more flexible, dynamic, detailed, and threatening, because it doesn't just look like a toy. It doesn't just look like a CGI model of it. So that's a great little example of them showing some love for their craft. The plot of it's the plot of Return of the Jedi. You know it. All of my comments for The Empire Strikes Back basically apply here. That's a good example of emphasis, actually. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, full page shot for when the battle starts. Jumping ahead, there's a really nice collection of production art from all three movies by several artists. And so I'm just going to like flip through this and kind of like throw mad love on the artists, because all of this is kind of like an interesting what if Star Wars ended up looking like this. So production art of R2-D2 by Ralph Mcquarrie. Production art of C-3PO by Ralph Mcquarrie. Man, that's even like more androgynous. Oh boy. Princess Leia Organa by Ralph Mcquarrie, and he has the note Leia after prison, so this would be like her prison uniform. Luke as Starfighter, Luke Skywalker by Ralph Mcquarrie. I don't know, this could be like an interesting cosplay thing, because there's like Han Solo with his vest, but instead of a black vest, it's a black shirt and a white vest. Han Solo by Ralph Mcquarrie. I kind of like how he just like terminates the legs, because you got the idea. An alternate take on Chewbacca, and much cuter, actually. A little bit more stoutly built. Chewbacca by Ralph Mcquarrie. Stormtrooper by Ralph Mcquarrie without the iconic helmet design. Ben Kenobi, also by Ralph Mcquarrie. It's interesting. We're also going to see some storyboard art, too. And a Tusken Raider by Ralph Mcquarrie. Okay, so this storyboard art is by Ivor Bedoes. It's kind of interesting how like the costumes and even like the style of lightsaber fighting has a different feel in these storyboards compared to what finally ended up happening. Like Darth Vader has some like little almost like Shogun helmet additions on his helmet. They seem to imply that the hilt of the lightsaber can resist the plasma energy of a lightsaber, so that's kind of an interesting idea. Production sketches from The Empire Strikes Back. So we've got a Tauntaun by Joe Johnston. I think Joe Johnston did a lot of these. An early version of the AT-ST Walker, early version of Yoda. It's kind of interesting that he has like the rising sun behind him, kind of tying in with that Japanese Bushido vibe he gives off. These are Dagobah storyboards by Ralph Mcquarrie. And I kind of like how these have some warm and cool color implied in them. Simple little watercolor sketches of X-Wing fighter crash landing, Luke and R2-D2 inside Yoda's hut, and he kind of has a different vibe still from the final puppet. And production sketches from Return of the Jedi. Gamorrean Guard by Joe Johnston. Another of the Gamorrean Guard by Joe Johnston. So they're much more goblin-like. They're less big and fat than the final design. They're less armed. A little bit more Tolkien-esque. Jabba the Hutt by Ralph Mcquarrie. And I remember like when I was a kid, there was some like TV special where they just talked a lot about all of the work that went into designing Jabba the Hutt. I wonder if some YouTuber has uploaded that. But anyway, yeah, there were lots and lots of different versions and ideas for Jabba the Hutt. So Ralph Mcquarrie has him armless with like a tail with finger appendages. And Joe Johnston has the hookah and bigger, stronger arms and kind of like a completely different facial style for Jabba. Then we have Ewok designs by Joe Johnston, a little bit more teddy bear-like. These guys are a little bit more, I don't know, like gremlin-like. And then getting closer to the final design by Joe Johnston. And these are some bonus sketches for the special editions. Oh, good grief, those special editions of The Return of the Jedi. But I like this concept art. So this is concept art for the female backup singers by Derek Thompson. I like the variety in their dresses and just how trashy they are, like high heels and everything. That's pretty cool. Palace Drummers, costume and drum design by Derek Thompson and George Hull. And they have like just interesting little notes to indicate what they're going for. Existing Barada mask, normal waist height. So they're thinking about like the height of the actors in the suit. Low belt line to give them this sort of stout and stocky look. And there are the guys drumming with some colors and yet another variation on what the drum could be like and what the drummers could be like. I like the variety of that. A rapper, concept drawings by George Hull. So I think one of these guys might have ended up in the special editions weird music scene that they did in Jabba's palace, but kind of like a cool little raptor guy with his strange instrument. And then some concept, what would this be? This is storyboard art for the special scenes that were added to the Return of the Jedi, kind of like showing all the people celebrating. And whatever your thoughts are on the special editions, I'm not a big fan of them, but this is like really cool stuff, just from like a behind the scenes perspective, because they actually describe to you what the shot is supposed to be describing, and I love how simple and clear the notes are, so you understand that the ship is moving that way with like a big arrow. Storyboard sequence by Doug Chang, beginning with Bespin Plaza tilt down view and Cloud Car and Skyhopper flyovers, ending with wipe to tilt up on Coruscant buildings. Yep, so you can kind of follow the logic of that. A pan left by a Cloud Car, and then as that goes up, Skyhopper enters, follow Skyhopper down. Pan left, following Skyhopper to reveal Mos Eisley. Continue pan, Vaporator enters frame, and this is kind of like a clever like disguise scene transition. Vaporator gives frame transition to Coruscant building, and the Coruscant building reveals festivities. Nice. Oop, I want to show it. This storyboard sequence ending with wipe to tilt up on Coruscant buildings. So I think that means it starts with the fireworks and moves down to the buildings. Bespin Plasma balcony production drawing by Doug Chang. Bespin Plasma production art drawing by Doug Chang. Nice, just like all the different cities and their different vibes. Mos Eisley Plaza production drawing by Doug Chang. Dancing Ewok storyboard art by Doug Chang for the little bonus. They changed the song or something at the end. Dancing Ewok storyboard art. Ewoks and Scene celebration art by Terrell Whitlatch. So Doug Chang did most of these. I love all the talent they get to produce this stuff. Coruscant Plaza art by Doug Chang. And then I think these aren't all by Doug Chang. So this one by Coruscant Plaza is by Doug Chang. This one's by George Hull. Coruscant Plaza concept art by George Hull. And the Coruscant Plaza concept art by George Hull. Cool. So much talent. More Coruscant Plaza concept art by George Hull. And okay, so they must have had George Hull just focus specifically on the Coruscant Plaza. That's interesting. So there's kind of like a division of labor where Chang was doing basically like storyboards for the whole scene, and then a couple artists were focusing on more specific parts. I love that whole process. So Hollywood hires talented people. No, at the end of the day, they make so much interesting stuff. Oh, there's also one last nerdy thing. There's a panel in here that I noticed got ripped off later, and here it's actually much better. So it's when Darth cuts off Luke's hand. They censor it basically by having a little piece of machinery get in the way, and I want to find that. There we go. So in this, they sort of censor the hand getting cut off by putting this machinery in the foreground and blocking your view of it. And this is really nice because all three of these are in front of Luke, so we can tell they're in the immediate foreground, like right in front of our face, and they're in the midground. There was some cheap Star Wars comic that Marvel did later where the artist clearly referenced this panel and misunderstood what was going on and just had like this thing floating like right at the end of Luke's wrist. So it created the worst tangent I've ever seen because the artist was basically copying this panel and then changing things that ruined the effect of it. So it created confusion. But here it actually works because we have it clearly communicated to us what's in the foreground. So there you go. Marvel comic artists always stealing from each other, lovingly tracing or copying from each other without credit to speed up production art. But in this one, because this is a really beautiful, masterful comic, they wanted to get it right, and it actually makes sense in this one. So this is a high recommendation. A lot of Star Wars comics are hit and miss. Some of them are really crappy or just plain goofy, but I think any Star Wars fan should try to pick up the comic adaptations of the original trilogy. The Dark Horse Comics edition is really beautifully produced, high quality, nice little bonus art, and they're the only one. I don't know if there's another comics adaptation of A New Hope. I might go digging around for it, but even if there is, the quality of the Dark Horse adaptation speaks for itself, and it belongs in every comics collection. A highest recommendation. So that's it. Number one Marvel Geek fan. I love you guys. I'll catch you later.